I sold my first night to a billionaire to keep my brother alive, and I'm not proud of it. If it were you, what would you have done when the hospital kept calling your name and the bill kept climbing? Before you judge me, listen, because the night I thought would break me is the same night that rewrote everything I thought I knew about power, pride, and love. My name is Amelia. I was that girl in the last row who smelled like rain and secondhand books. I drank soy milk for breakfast, ate a dry bun for dinner, wore the same faded blue dress twice a week, and told myself it looked intentional. You know what I mean? Like if I pretended it was a style choice, it wouldn't hurt so much. I carried old notebooks instead of a sleek laptop. I worked 3 jobs that never lined up with the bus schedule. Tutoring kids who were richer than me, serving noodles at a hole in the wall, and playing piano in a lounge where the lights were low and the tips were lower. And every dollar had an address, tuition, first rent, second, and whatever was left went straight to City General, where my big brother David had been asleep for 2 long years. That morning I was in a guest lecture, the kind where everyone sits straighter because the speaker is famous, money, and when he walked in the air actually changed. Navy suit, quiet, confidence eyes that looked like they already knew the ending and were just waiting for us to catch up. Kelvin. Everyone whispered his name like it was a password. He talked about leadership and how business is really about people, not numbers, he said. Every choice has a cost, and sometimes the bill comes due before you have the cash. I tried to write, I really did, but the words smudged. The room leaned, my stomach folded into itself, and the desk came up fast. When I opened my eyes, I was on the floor, and the man in the navy suit was kneeling next to me, his voice low and steady, asking when I last ate. I tried to lie, said I was fine, but my face told on me. He helped me sit up, told someone to get water, told me to breathe. A small kindness in a room that only knew how to stare. That should have been the end of it. A moment between a tired student and a guest speaker who would disappear back into his skyline. But life doesn't like clean endings. That night, I was at the piano lounge trying to make an old, upright sound, less tired than I felt when he walked in again. Kelvin didn't look like a man who stumbles into places by accident. He looked like a plan that had learned how to walk, but his eyes found me anyway. He sat near the piano, not too close, the kind of distance that says I'm not a threat, and asked why a top student was killing herself with side jobs. I told him pieces at first. Tuition overdue, 20,000 and counting. And then I told him the rest, because sometimes you hear your own voice and realize honesty is cheaper than pride. My brother in a coma. The hospital asking for deposits. The feeling that every day was a choice between drowning and pretending I wasn't. He listened without blinking, the clink of glasses filling the spaces where advice usually lives. Then he made an offer, not a pep talk, not a prayer, a number, 500,000. One night. It hit the table like a gavel. I stared at the keys, because they were easier than his face. If it were you, what would you have done? Would you carry your pride out of that room and watch your brother's chart turn red? Would you swallow the part of you that still believes life is fair and pay the price nobody talks about until it's standing in front of them wearing a suit? He said he wasn't coming back to teach, that I'd never have to see him on campus again. He said survival leaves no easy choices, and none of that made it feel right. But it gave me something to hold while I fell. I went with him, quiet palms cold, the city sliding by like it didn't want to be a witness. His penthouse was all height and glass and glossy floors that made me want to whisper, the kind of place where everything has a job, and none of those jobs include real life. I told myself one night for David, one night for school, one night, so I wouldn't lose every battle at once. There are parts I won't share, not because I'm ashamed, but because they're mine, because even desperate people deserve privacy. Morning crawled in anyway. He stood by the window, putting on his jacket like armor, and I said I needed to go. He told me to eat first. I said no, I didn't want anything from him. And then my phone buzzed. 1 million landed in my account, like a building falling in slow motion. He handed me a black card. I pushed it back, told him I'd only take what we agreed, no charity, no leash. He asked for my number. I gave it with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. And 2 hours later I blocked him, because sometimes courage looks like a small act you can do all by yourself. You think that was the ending, right? Wrong. The next day on campus, the whispers got teeth, Lily. The campus beauty with a wardrobe that cost more than my tuition. Made me her project buns and soy milk. Really, Amelia, what are you playing at? Girls like you pretend to be humble until they cash out. And like the universe enjoys bad timing. Kelvin walked into another guest lecture, even though he'd said he was done. He talked about choices and costs while looking at me without looking at me, and I built a wall inside my chest so fast it made me dizzy. After class, he asked why I blocked him. I told him I didn't need him, that night was a mistake, and he stepped aside like a door opening into winter. Then danger found me where I thought I was safe. 3 men walked into the lounge with eyes like broken bottles, slammed a hand on the piano, and said I'd taken money that wasn't mine. They spit out the name Michael like it had teeth. I said I didn't know what they were talking about. One reached for me and a voice from the shadows said, "Enough." Kelvin's bodyguards moved like they'd rehearsed. This scene pulled me through a narrow corridor I'd never seen, out a hidden door into air that tasted like freedom. Did I call the police? No. Did I tell the manager? No. I stood shaking and thought about how his shadow kept showing up where I'd sworn I didn't want it. Days later, I went to the bursar with money I'd scraped together from tutoring, ready to throw it at the problem, like a bucket at a wildfire. And the woman behind the glass smiled like I'd told a good joke. Balance 0, not just this semester, the whole year. And congratulations, a scholarship until graduation. I didn't need an envelope to know whose name wasn't on it. I found him outside a building that always felt too expensive for students, and asked why. He shrugged like he didn't understand the question. Do you think that's fair, helping someone in secret, then pretending your hands are clean, calling her independent, while taking away the one fight she still believes she can win? I walked away with my face on fire, and the worst part was that tiny part of me that felt relief. Yeah, that happened. Then the call. David's condition had slipped. The doctor's voice was professional, in that way that means the news isn't good, and when I hung up, I didn't know whether to run or break. On the other side of the city, Kelvin asked his assistant for my real file, not the pretty one, the one with night shifts and grade reports, and a list of payments I made by turning myself into a ghost. And he called in the best doctors he could find. 2 days later, he met me outside the hospital, looked at a face I didn't recognize as my own, and said there was a treatment overseas they could try. It was new. It was expensive. It might be the only chance. 1 million. I said I wouldn't be controlled by his money. He said this wasn't about control. He said, "Don't let your pride kill your brother." I said, "Fine, but I'll repay every cent," he said. "Good, repay me, but first let him live. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind." I was leaving the lounge late, the alley cool and quiet, when a van door opened and hands pulled me into the dark. A cloth pressed over my mouth, then a room without windows, whispers that sounded like rules for a world I never wanted to know. They said auction. They said, if you don't sell, you don't see morning. There was a platform and a voice that priced people like furniture, and when they shoved me under that light, the numbers started climbing. 2 million, 2.5, 3, and the gavel fell like a heartbeat I couldn't stop. Hours later, I stumbled into a quiet room that smelled like leather and secrets, and Kelvin walked in with eyes like storms breaking. You paid $3 million for me, I said, like I was the punchline to a joke the world tells poor girls, and he said he would have paid more. He said Michael had been waiting to strike where it hurt. He said I was targeted because of him, not because of anything I did, and that should have made me feel safer, but truth doesn't always feel kind. I told him his world was too dangerous, that being near him felt like wearing a target, and I left before I said something that would trap me more than any van ever could. The doctor told me my body looked like a battlefield, malnutrition and stress, 3 meals a day, not up for negotiation. And Kelvin stood there with his hands in his pockets, saying I'd known better all along, which stung because it was true. The rumors at school didn't fade, they multiplied, and when Kelvin donated 2 new libraries, the halls exploded. Of course he's building this because of her. Of course she's his mistress, as if generosity can't exist without a scandal attached to it. I called him and said, "Stop, what do you want? What do you really want?" And he told me to come and ask him to his face. In his living room, he looked at me like the only person in the city who wasn't a problem to be solved, and he said he didn't want repayment, he wanted me. The front door opened before I could answer. A woman walked in who carried silence like a weapon, and he said as easily as breathing, "Mother, this is Amelia, my girlfriend." Madame Rose was built from old money and steel expectations. She took one look at me and saw everything she didn't want for her son. She spoke about status and alliances and politics like a chessboard only she understood, and she told Kelvin that a man like him couldn't be ruled by feelings. I kept my back straight and said nothing, because sometimes a quiet spine is louder than a speech. War declared. Meanwhile, Janet, the woman his mother wanted, started appearing beside him at charity dinners, glossy photographs, and practiced laughter, the kind of pairing that makes headlines, and I told myself I didn't care while I felt something in my chest go tight, like a fist that wouldn't open. At the company, the air was different too, boardroom smiles hiding knives, deals going sideways, motives curdling behind friendly handshakes, and Kelvin did what he does. He cut out the rot in 1 week and left the building cleaner than his conscience. He didn't look victorious, he looked tired, and that was the first time I wondered if power is just a taller kind of loneliness. Then came the twist, the one that flipped the whole story on its head and made me question whether anything in our lives is random. Kelvin asked his assistant to pull my file again deeper this time, and she brought him something she had left out before because it sounded like a myth until it didn't. Years ago, before he died, Kelvin's father ran a community project that supported small families on the edge. He met my parents there. He paid for medicine when my mother's illness hollowed out our savings. He helped patch the roof over my father's little shop when the rains didn't stop. And he told his wife, his son, anybody who would listen, that if he ever had a chance to protect their children, he wouldn't fail. I didn't know names back then. My parents just spoke about a man who kept us from falling through winter. When Kelvin told me, his voice shook like he was confessing something holy, and suddenly the feeling I had in that lecture hall, that he wasn't a stranger even when he was, found a reason. He put the file in his mother's hands, and I watched a woman who never apologized, let her eyes shine for a man she lost, and a promise he left behind. She turned to me and said, "My dear, I misjudged you," and I believed her because grief and love make honest witnesses. Do you think that changes the story? Does a debt of kindness from one generation make the next one inevitable? Or is that just a narrative we build to make ourselves feel better about the things we wanted anyway? I still ask myself that on quiet mornings, when the city hasn't decided who I am yet. Then the phone call that felt like sunrise. City, general breathless joy. David is awake, the treatment worked, he's asking for you. We ran there. Yes, Kelvin, yes, his mother too. And my brother looked like a miracle sitting up in a room that only held silence for years. He squeezed Kelvin's hand and said thank you, with the kind of sincerity that makes words heavier, and Kelvin said, "No thanks between us, just live," and I cried into the pillow because I didn't know where else to put that much relief. If this were a movie, it would cut to black right there. But life still had one more public scene left. The press wouldn't stop asking about Kelvin's future. The merger that looked like a wedding, the political match that looked like a business plan, and he decided to end it the way he knows how. He stood behind microphones, lights blinking like impatient eyes, and said he would not marry Janet. He would not trade love for leverage. He would not use the company he built to shrink the life he wanted. And then he said my name, in public on camera, without a flinch. And the room went loud and quiet at the same time. Janet left the country with her pride wrapped tight. Comment sections did what they do, and I stayed on my couch, breathing like I had run up 20 flights of stairs in a dress that didn't fit. That night, he took me to a restaurant that looked like the city had been dipped in gold, a string quartet playing songs everyone knows, even if they don't. And he knelt beside my chair and asked me to marry him. He said Michael was gone, his crimes exposed, his threats empty. He said I wouldn't be facing any of this alone, he said. I was his world now, and I believed him, not because of the speech, but because of the pauses where he let me interrupt. I said yes with tears that didn't ask permission. The room applauded like we were all relieved at the same time, and for a second, the future looked simple. But I promised honesty, not a fairy tale. Love didn't erase the night that started all of this. It didn't refund it or rebrand it. It didn't turn my desperation into a cute story. It gave me context. It offered redemption, but the scar is still there. I can feel it when I run my fingers over the past. Consent under need is still consent. That's what people say. And they're not wrong, but need is a weight that tilts the table and money sits on the other side like an elephant. Do you think what I did is unforgivable? Or do you think the world is built to push girls like me toward cliffs and then blame us for learning how to climb? Do you think Kelvin's money saved me or trapped me until he learned to put it down? I ask myself that more than I admit. I also think about dignity, the middle word between pride and charity that nobody uses enough. Why do we label help as pity when it comes from someone richer, and label refusal as pride when it comes from someone poorer? Maybe the right word is partnership. Maybe love is the only currency that doesn't insult you when it pays. Maybe power means standing next to someone while they say their own name, not speaking for them because you can. You know what I mean? I still drink soy milk sometimes because habits don't die just because your life changed. But now I eat breakfast with it because a doctor who cared enough to scold me said 3 meals a day isn't a luxury when your body has been in a fight. I still play piano when nobody's watching because it sounds like home. I still use old notebooks because new ones feel like they expect too much. And I still tell Kelvin to look me in the eye before he fixes something without asking, because love without consent is just another contract. He laughs, I laugh, we try again tomorrow. So I'll leave you with this. Satisfaction with a sharp edge. A poor student traded one night for a chance at survival. A billionaire learned that protection in the shadows isn't protection at all. A family's old promise reached across years and kept a small miracle alive. And now 2 people are trying to build a life in the light where every choice has an audience. Do you think money and morality can share a table without knocking each other's plates to the floor? Do you think a promise made by a father can become a bridge for his son? Do you think consent under survival should be judged the same as consent under comfort? If it were you, what would you have done? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Argue with me if you need to tell me where I was wrong, where I was brave, where I was just human. Share your version. If you've ever faced an impossible choice and did what you had to do, to keep someone you love breathing. If this story made you feel something, anger, hope both at once, hit subscribe, send it to that one friend who never judges first and always asks better questions. I'll see you in the next one, and I hope by then we're all a little kinder to the versions of ourselves who did what it took to make it to morning.